Hello, my name is Gala Diaz Langou. I'm the Executive Director of CPEC. CPEC is one of Latin America's main think tanks, and it's the main think tank in Argentina, where we are based in Buenos Aires. CPEC aims to influence policies, such as most of the think tanks, and we do so by three main activities. The first one is applied research. The second one is to have plural and open dialogues. And the third one is to provide technical assistance to governments who are implementing policy. We've learned lessons in these three dimensions which are relevant and which I would like to share with you. Firstly, in applied research, it is obviously important to have in mind and bear and then translate to the papers all the lessons that have been learned in other countries and even in our own country in different places that can feed into our policy recommendations. Secondly, it is important to adapt those lessons learned to what is feasible in our context. For instance, we in Argentina have been for many years now in a context of macroeconomic instability. So we don't have a lot of fiscal margin to finance new public policies, and that is a restraint that must be considered when providing policy recommendations to governments, even in the national or provincial or even local spheres. This is not the only restraint that must be considered in doing this adaptation. We also have the political economy of the different contexts in which we work, which should be analyzed. And last but not least, the technical feasibility. What is possible given the capabilities that the state has in its different levels, and what we need the state to do, and what can be done with the people the state has now, with the technical resources that the state has now, with the information the state has. These three dimensions, the fiscal, political, and technical dimensions of feasibility, are crucial when providing policy recommendations. Secondly, moving towards the dialogues that we have with different stakeholders, we always aim those dialogues to be plural. Plural in a political sense, obviously, because we live in a democratic context, thankfully, and governments tend to change in administration. So we need to provide discussions that can ensure that the policy recommendations don't change with the change in public administrations, but continue and turn into state policies ultimately. So for that to happen, we need to have on board and have discussed the policy recommendations with different people and stakeholders and political parties who can be responsible for the implementation of these policies given the turn in government ultimately after winning an election. Secondly, we aim these dialogues to be also intersectorial. Why? Most of the problems we try to solve with our policy recommendations aren't able to be solved solely by the state. They need actions from other stakeholders, such as the private sectors, the unions, the media, the civil society, social movements, international cooperation even. So we need to discuss these policy recommendations with those other actors who also need to engage in providing the solutions. Thirdly, most of policy recommendations have an impact on territory, and we need to bear in mind what the position, the interests, and the view on these recommendations are from those actors in those territories. For instance, if we are planning to change something in a specific province, we should have a map of those relevant actors in that province who will be key for the implementation of those policies and bring them to the discussion. We should not have that discussion solely from the central level of government. And lastly, at CPEC, as in many think tanks, I'm sure, we aim at discussing things beyond the precise moment we are living now and maybe the political situation or the economic context that we now have, but try to have a longer perspective in a longer time frame. Therefore, we need to consider also a change and a renewal in the leaderships of the political parties, and all of the political forces, but also the other leaderships, the unions, private sector, etc., etc. And therefore, it is important for these dialogues to be intergenerational, because those who will take the place in leading these different sectors need to be part of this discussion, because they will be ultimately, if everything goes well, be part of the solution. Thirdly, our third vector of policy influence is working hand in hand with governments in the implementation of these policies. Obviously, the responsibility of the implementation goes to the government, but we provide technical assistance in order to improve and maximize the potential impact those policies have. We do this by having people who have specific knowledge on how to do so, and that have been doing so in other contexts. Therefore, it is important, and this is specifically important for maybe looking inside a think tank, how we structure our human and capital resources, and how we have people within our teams that have this experience, that have been on the other side of the desk, that have been in charge of the implementation, and now can bring that experience into multiplying it to others who are now trying to do the same endeavor. These three are the three vectors that CPEC implements towards influencing public policy and providing a more stable context to think our developmental strategy as a country. Obviously, trying to do this forecast, trying to plan a development strategy in contexts such as the one we are currently experiencing now, globally, in terms of uncertainty, in terms of stability, in terms of shifting of global power, in terms of shared crisis, it is obviously more difficult to do. It is not easy to plan in uncertain contexts, but it is the most relevant thing we can do. We will not be able to provide any other path that can lead us towards a more certain context without it. Therefore, one of the main roles we have a think tank, and particularly as think tank leaders, it is to provide the space to forecast or even backcast using different methodologies future scenarios that can provide a fertile ground to build consensus on specific actions that can turn into certainties and try to turn this uncertain context that we now face into a certain path towards a better future. Thank you very much.